So I think I will kick off our webinar this afternoon. Welcome everybody to EuropaBio's SME platform webinar on this sunny sunny Thursday, April the 22nd. We are looking today at EU industrial biotechnology priorities for small companies, and we are absolutely delighted to welcome everybody into the webinar today. The webinar will be recorded, and we will be able to share the recording and the slides with all participants after the event. So I'll give you a quick introduction and welcome. So my name is Claire Scantleberry. I'm the Director General of EuropaBio, and I will be the overall moderator for today. But I'm joined by our team from the Industrial Biotechnology Council, Lucy and Agnes, who will introduce themselves as they get onto the business part of the webinar this afternoon. We aim to take about 60 minutes for the webinar, and you are absolutely encouraged to ask questions through using the chat function, because we have a dedicated Q&A session after the initial presentation. We have a wide range of participants with us today, which is really fantastic, including lots of small companies that attended through an invitation from our National Association members. So we hope that this webinar is useful for you. We have a very short agenda for you today. So we're going to have a quick introduction to EuropaBio, because there is indeed no such thing as a free lunch. So I will tell you a little bit about us before we get Lucy and Agnes. Then we will have a look at some of the key EU industrial biotechnology priorities that may impact you as small companies or working in the industry, both now and in the future. So while a lot of these priorities may not be immediately impactful, it's very useful to know which way policies are developing and how they're likely to be translated into legislation and initiatives. So it's great to help you in your slightly longer term strategic planning, and also to understand where people see policy priorities in Brussels and the types of decisions that they make. After the main slides, we will have a short Q&A session, and then we will wrap up the webinar by letting you know how you can stay involved and come to our next meetings. So I'll give you a really quick introduction to EuropaBio. We seek to support both a healthy people and planet through the application of biotechnology, and there really is no time like the present to do that. As you know, we're in the middle of the COVID crisis, and biotechnology is busy diagnosing, treating, and vaccinating people, which is fantastic to know, and has happened in an unprecedentedly quick time. But whilst on the industrial biotechnology side, the Green Deal dominates all policy and business development going forward, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. But it really shows where industrial biotechnology is playing such a major role, and a role that can only grow in how Europe and its economy develops. So here at EuropaBio, we look at technologies from lots of different perspectives. We're very much interested in helping to build a sustainable industrial ecosystem in which the science can be successfully delivered, both to patients, to consumers with novel products, and for the environment with reduced use of scarce resources and land, and novel products that can be produced through industrial biotechnology pathways. Our activities are quite broad. So as well as looking at the technologies directly, we look very much at the regulation and the policies that help shape them and help enable them to be delivered to market. We look at the whole innovation pathway, and that really is a very long, complex and global pathway these days. We support small companies as much as possible and have an increasing number of small companies directly as members. And finally, we communicate and celebrate biotechnology wherever we can. And indeed, this year is our 25th anniversary, and we have a really lovely program of celebrations to help look at what amazing jobs biotechnology have done over the past 25 years and how we go forward and ensure an amazing next 25 years. Our structure internally is that we have three main councils as part of EuropaBio. We have our Healthcare Biotech Council, we have our National Associations Council, which is where many of our SMEs join us through today. And we have our Industrial Biotechnology Council that you're going to hear from the team for today. And as part of that, in parallel, we have our SME platform, which is where we try to support SMEs as much as possible through support and advice and connections around all aspects of biotechnology. So this is a tiny snapshot of our members, and you can see they are both large and small. We have tiny wee startup companies that are just building up their sort of first and second round funding. And then we have large global companies such as DSM and BASF who help really build the long-term infrastructure for biotechnology within Europe. So, but you don't need me to tell you any more about biotechnology. So I am going to hand over to Lucy and Agnes now, who will take you through the policy priorities that you will need to know more about today. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Claire, and hello to everyone also from us in the Industrial Biotechnology Team of EuropaBio. So first, to briefly introduce ourselves, my name is Agnes Borg and I'm Industrial Biotech Director, and I'm here together with Lucy.
Hi everyone, my name is Lucy McMurtry and I'm Industrial Biotech Officer.
So before we start with our review of different initiatives, we wanted to say a few words about our Industrial Biotechnology Council, because this is really where we develop our sector-specific strategy and our advocacy and biotech positioning together with a range of companies, both big and small, and you see them here on this slide as well. So it's both companies, but also representatives of our national associations. And our core activities in our council focus to a large extent around the circular bioeconomy, food and feed topics, and our flagship event EFIB, which you will also hear about more in a minute. And you also see some of our key overarching priorities on the slide. So one is relating to a favorable policy and regulatory environment for industrial biotech products and processes in the EU, which includes a science-based, proportionate and predictable regulatory approach to both current and future biotech innovation, with genome editing being one example. And of course, awareness is important too. Biotechnology is a complex technology, and we work with translating this into concrete impact stories and increasing awareness and understanding of solutions that are coming from industrial biotechnology and their contribution towards objectives, for example, under the Green Deal. We also have priorities relating to the EU Research, Innovation and Funding Framework, and also in the context of the move towards more renewable-based portfolios. Market uptake is, of course, important there as well, and that's another topic that is important for us. And if we move on to look a little bit on the context on the next slide in which we are operating right now, of course, you've seen probably this slide many times. We made a couple of tweaks to it, but of course, the EU Green Deal is often referred to as the EU's new growth strategy. There was an agreement just yesterday around the climate neutrality or the climate law, so putting the climate neutrality objective into law. So this is really, of course, at the core of the Green Deal, and there will also be the so-called Fit for 55 climate package in June, which also looks at the 2030 perspective for moving towards these objectives. But of course, industrial biotechnology has an important role to play in many of the overarching priorities of the Commission, and we agree, of course, that there should be a focus on a greener recovery for Europe. And we've highlighted here on the slide, so the blue boxes we have added just to show some ways in which or initiatives that are of importance and relevance to industrial biotechnology. And they relate to, I mentioned already, the climate law, but also industrial strategy, circular economy, the chemical strategy, biodiversity, Farmtofork. And then, of course, there are other relating topics linking to Horizon Europe and sustainable finance and so on. And we are going to speak about some of these topics with you today. We have a short webinar today, so of course we will not cover everything, but we have made a selection of some policy current and upcoming areas that we think are important to discuss. And also now we are in a time where, you know, following the publication of the Green Deal and the associated strategies in 2020, we're moving forward with various initiatives and concrete initiatives being put forward across the board. And there are, of course, also various steps here, and Lucy will say a bit more about that.
Thank you, Agnes. So looking a little bit more in detail at each of these strategies, how do they go from policy to impact? So we thought we would look at the Farm to Fork strategy in a little bit more detail. We'll also mention a few of the other strategies, but as Agnes said, we'll try and cover as much ground as we can in the webinar today. So the Farm to Fork strategy was published last year in May. It includes 27 legislative and non-legislative initiatives running from 2020 to 2024. And as some of you may know, the Farm to Fork strategy is well known for these very ambitious targets around food production and sustainable food production, including the reduction of pesticide use by 50%, reduction of fertilizer use, reduction of antimicrobial use, and increase in the overall share of organic agriculture in Europe. These are obviously all important targets for European sustainability, and there are all targets where industrial biotechnology can play a role. So on the slide, we've outlined a few initiatives that are relevant, both legislative and non-legislative. So upcoming very soon, hopefully next week, is the Commission study on new genomic techniques, including genome editing, CRISPR, and so on. This is, of course, a study, but it may include a legislative proposal, and so this is very significant for all of the biotechnology sectors in view of the GMO directive and discussions around that. Then there are a few other legislative proposals that we've outlined here, looking at food chain supplies and sustainable food systems. As you can see in the quote at the bottom, it's important to look at all the strategies within the Green Deal holistically. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So moving on to the industrial strategy. This was published in March 2020, so over a year ago, and in view of the COVID crisis is being updated by the Commission. And the updated strategy is also expected towards the end of this month. The industrial strategy is very important. When it was published, it included also the SME strategy. And this is a really important recognition of the role that SMEs play in the EU industry and the EU economy. As you can see there on the slide, that Europe has 25 million SMEs, and they really are the backbone. The industrial strategy also references a very key point underpinning the Green Deal and the green recovery, which is this twin green and digital transition. So when the Commission is not considering COVID, it's considering this green and digital transition. So these are really key focus areas for us. I spoke a little bit about the update to the industrial strategy. EuropaBio is part of the Industrial Forum, and this is a forum that the Commission set up in updating the industrial strategy to take into account lessons learned from COVID and how various industrial sectors can play a role in the recovery. We're actually the only life sciences association, which is really significant for us because it means we really have a good chance to highlight the importance of the life sciences sector. Finally, I've spoken a little bit about the synergies between the strategies. So all of the strategies play together. It's important to consider not only sustainable food production, but sustainable industrial production. Look at the role that SMEs play, not only within the industrial strategy, but also the farm to fork and circular economy. And I'll hand back over to Agnes for more on that.
Yes, indeed, because I think it was the day after the industrial strategy that the Commission published its new circular economy action plan last year. And as Lucy was already emphasizing, it's important to emphasize the synergies and links with other policies. And one that we are really trying to emphasize is also around the circular economy and bioeconomy policies, because they have many strong thematic links, both, for example, food waste, biomass, and bio-based products are areas of intervention here. And we think it's very important to have a coherent and supportive policy for the circular economy and integrate the circular economy and the bioeconomy throughout the EU policies. And of course, biorefineries is one example of, or it's really at the center of the circular economy. But if we look at, on the next slide, we've put a bit more specific initiatives that are part of this new action plan. Also, as Lucy was saying, these strategies, they come with many different actions. So there are 35 or so actions under the Circular Economy Action Plan of 2020. And they aim to target the whole life cycle of products and looking at, you know, how they are designed, circular economy processes, sustainable consumption, but also end of life. So, and at the heart of this new action plan is also this sustainable product policy initiative, which the Commission is consulting on for the moment. So it's still upcoming. And an important focus there is on extending the scope of the Ecodesign Directive, which is now focusing on energy-related aspects to the broadest possible range of products, and also looking at different sustainability principles in relation to those. So there will be various sectors. I mean, high impact sectors will be mainly in focus. They mention, for example, ICT and textiles, furniture, but also products such as chemicals, for example. And of course, it's possible that this will mean that, you know, the eco-design and new mandatory requirements will have impact both, of course, on larger companies and on SMEs. And the Commission will also do an impact assessment when they are developing this initiative. And they have also said that they will give particular attention to SMEs here. And the Circular Economy Action Plan also has a focus on specific value chains. And to give a few examples there, some are, or one example is, for example, packaging. And there are initiatives coming out there in relation to the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive, a revision on the so-called essential requirements for packaging, for example. Another one is plastic. As you know, it's a very visible topic that is often part of these type of initiatives. So, and the Commission will also, as part of this, publish a policy framework for bioplastics that is going to look at both bio-based plastic, but also biodegradable and compostable plastics. Food, water, and nutrients is another key value chain, and there one of the focuses is around reducing food waste, and there's a clear link also to the Farmtofork strategy. Many initiatives around waste policy and targets, but also secondary raw materials, for example, about developing EU end of waste criteria for certain waste streams, and but also cross-cutting actions. And one of those is that is also high and much spoken about right now is in relation to the taxonomy regulation, which you've probably heard about or maybe are involved in the discussions on as well. And on the next slide, we have a few points on this, because also yesterday, there's a lot happening this week. The Commission published its so-called Sustainable Finance April package, and this is linking to the Commission's work in wanting to channel sustainable finance towards more sustainable technologies and businesses. And as part of this, there was the publication of a taxonomy delegated act on climate, so climate related matters. And so basically this taxonomy is a type of common classification of economic activities that contribute significantly towards the environmental objectives that have been set out. So for this first delegated act, that was focused on climate change mitigation and adaptation. There are technical screening criteria that have been set, and it's looking at various sectors like energy, forestry, manufacturing, transport, etc. So they were able to agree on this yesterday, but it has indeed been quite a heated and political discussion around this topic and what goes into those specific criteria. And I think also this topic is, the sustainable finance topic is an important one, going beyond also the specific taxonomy delegated acts, but it's part of the discourse around sustainable finance right now, and also others like the European Investment Bank are also they have also set course of really aligning with the EU taxonomy regulation in their discussions on these topics as well. And we've been also active on this topic with our Bioeconomy Alliance from a bioeconomy perspective when it comes to criteria for bio-based products, but also when it comes to the importance of consistency with other EU policies and that have been set out, and to make sure that bioeconomy is considered positively in this context, because we really think that the bio-based industries and bioeconomy have an important part of this discussion. And this is an ongoing debate, and there will also be another delegated act by the summer, I believe, that will look at the other objectives, and the circular economy is one of those. So we will for sure keep watching out for that one. And I hand over to Lucy again.
Thank you, Agnes. So continuing to look at financing and funding opportunities, we wanted to give you a little bit of an overview on Horizon Europe. So this is, of course, the European Research Programme. And there on the screen, you see the diagram breaking it down into various pillars. There's lots of components to Horizon Europe. It launched in February, and the first work programme is published in April. It will run from 2021 to 2027 and has a budget of 95 billion euros. So there's a lot of money going into this program. On the screen, under Pillar 2, Global Challenges and European Industrial Competitiveness, this pillar is broken up into various clusters, and Cluster 6, highlighted in red, is the most relevant one for us, because as you can see, it deals with food, bioeconomy, natural resources, agriculture, and environment. Cluster 6 has a budget of around 9 billion and has also earmarked some funding specifically for projects relating to circular economy, as well as also genome editing. There is an online portal, and we will include links to relevant resources in the slides when we circulate them after the webinar. But funding for the cluster 6 under Pillar 2 is allocated through an online portal where calls for funding and tender are circulated. I'll also go into a little bit of detail on Pillar 3. So this is probably the most relevant pillar for SMEs, and this is the European Innovation Council. So the European Innovation Council provides support to innovations with breakthrough and disruptive nature and scale-up potential that are too risky for private investors. It has an overall budget of 10 billion, ranging across these 3 complementary instruments that are intended to bridge the gap from idea to market. So this includes EIC Pathfinder, Transition, and Accelerator. So Pathfinder is dedicated mainly for early technology to proof of concept, includes R&I grants. And EIC transition carries on from EIC Pathfinder, so from proof of concept to pre-commercial applications. And funding there is also via R&I grants. And then finally, EIC Accelerator is the largest instrument, and this looks at grants and investments for SMEs and startups going from pre-commercial to market and scale up. Within the European Innovation Council, 70% of the budget is earmarked for SMEs, so this is a really significant financing instrument. The first calls for EIC Pathfinder and EIC Accelerator were opened at the beginning of April. And within those calls, so the first call for Accelerator includes 1 billion in funding, and around half of that funding is specifically allocated for innovations that support the EU Green Deal, as well as digital and health technologies. So again, going back to the point I raised of the twin green and digital transitions. So these are really the focus moving forward. And then a final component under Horizon Europe is the joint undertakings.
Yes, indeed. And also from EuropaBio side, so we've been involved in the discussions around the bioeconomy for quite a long time. And as many of you will know, the Biobased Industries joint undertaking was set up following the first bioeconomy strategy, which came out in 2012. And it's a public-private partnership between the Commission and the Biobased Industries consortium, so the private partner there. And it's really aiming to contribute towards sustainable and competitive bio-based industries in Europe. And yeah, so, and this is a good example of an industry collaboration driven initiative, but also one that has a very strong emphasis on SME participation. So 35% of the funding and 40% of the beneficiaries. I think the target was around 20% of the funding towards SMEs, but it has really shown a lot of engagement and participation there. Also, high SME participation rates compared to other initiatives under Horizon 2020. I think as well, this has really shown to be a very high impact initiative, also with focus on higher TRL levels and on bringing innovative products to the market, but also products that have, for example, lower CO2 footprint than fossil-based counterparts, for example. And industrial biotechnology is also one of the sectors where SMEs are predominantly active in this partnership. And also looking ahead, so as Lucy already spoke about, going from Horizon 2020 towards Horizon Europe. So on the next slide, we've also put a few words on that. So the Circular Biobased Europe is the forthcoming initiative under Horizon Europe, and the proposal for this, together with the other joint undertakings, so the institutionalized partnerships, was put forward in February and is now being considered by the co-legislators. And there is a final version foreseen to be adopted towards the end of the year. But also, if you look at the proposal, for example, for the new joint undertakings, there's also a strong emphasis on SMEs and their participation here. And I think it's also, so of course, I mean, it's also significantly industry driven. They have their strategic innovation and research agenda, which helps form the calls, and industry has an important role to play in the development of this. So there's a lot happening with the transition, and a lot of opportunities also coming under the new partnership, I'm sure. So we wanted to make sure to mention that one here as well. And Lucy has also another example that we wanted to cover in today's webinar.
Yes, thank you, Agnes. So as Claire mentioned in her introduction, we look at the entire innovation pathway. So we wanted to look also at something a little bit further along So looking at the regulatory process and approvals, and obviously this includes the transparency regulation, which is a new development. So the transparency regulation entered into force on the 27th of March this year, so just under a month ago, so it's very, very new. The relevant authority here in this case, as you can see on the slide, is of course EFSA, so the European Food Safety Authority, who oversees approvals of food and feed additives, novel foods, GM crops, food contact materials, crop protection products, and so on. So the transparency regulation is a relatively new, well, very new, as I mentioned. And the aim is to increase the transparency of EU risk assessment, but also to strengthen the reliability, objectivity, and independence of studies used by EFSA, and finally revisiting the governance to ensure its long-term sustainability. So I'll just like to note in this introductory slide that EuropaBio is a registered EFSA stakeholder in the business and food industry category, which also includes other EU associations like Food Drink Europe and CropLife Europe. So we have regular dialogues with EFSA on behalf of our members as well. I will also note that there is dedicated support available to SMEs with this specific email address. So SMEs looking for advice on applications or pre-submission advice can write into this office. So looking more into detail on the transparency regulation, what specifically is changing? So as I mentioned, this obviously, it's all in the name. This regulation aims to increase transparency. And so this includes both new requirements as well as new platforms. So the new platforms include a platform called Connect EFSA, which is for applicants submitting applications, but also a new platform called Open EFSA. Both of these have only been online about a month. So again, they're still very new and information is still flowing into them. Open EFSA is a publicly available database, and this aims to provide information also to civil society, consumers, NGOs, and all other stakeholders. And this replaces, for those of you who are more familiar with EFSA, this replaces the register of questions that used to exist. And then there's also a few smaller portals, including the e-submission food chain platform and Portalino. Those refer more to confidentiality claims, and I'll touch upon those in just a moment. And so the transparency regulation is quite wide-ranging. There are practical arrangements on the implementation relating to various topics, including the pre-submission phase, so the phase in which applicants can approach EFSA for advice on their dossiers, public consultations, and also on key issues of transparency and confidentiality. One line that the transparency regulation has to walk is providing as much transparency to consumers and stakeholders and civil society as possible, while also, of course, protecting business interests. And that's where the confidentiality claims will come in. So key points of impact for companies submitting applications to EFSA, and note this is not specific to SMEs or large companies. This applies to all, but of course the difficulties will vary depending on whether you're a large company or an SME. But a new requirement is that all studies that support a dossier have to be notified in advance. So that means before the study starts, it has to be notified within the dossier submitted for approval. And another requirement includes the proactive disclosure of regulatory data in accordance with specific criteria laid out in the practical arrangements. Thank you. So as I mentioned, all studies have to be notified, including, so studies can of course be carried out by a company themselves, but can also be carried out by a third party, an external lab, in which case they have to be co-notified. So it's a lot of logistics to take into account when preparing a dossier for submission. And then the confidentiality criteria are also quite stringent. They will be applied on a case-by-case basis, but they do specify that information older than 5 years would automatically be disclosed. and also information whose disclosure would cause a harm to up to 5% of applicants' turnover can't be claimed confidential. So, and there are more criteria in the practical arrangements, but these are kind of the difficult criteria to look at. So these are key impacts that we're looking at with our members, also with other associations that we work with at the EU level. And again, as I mentioned, this is a very new regulation. The portals have been open less than a month, so there's still a lot of things that are being worked out by the users of the portals as well as by EFSA. So this is a quick snapshot and of relevant policy areas and relevant developments in the industrial biotech sphere. And I think now we can move on to questions from the audience.
That's great. Thanks very much, Lucy and Agnes. We've thrown a lot of information into this already, trying to pretty much pack in everything that we think is relevant now and coming up within the sphere of industrial biotechnology. We have no questions so far, which is absolutely fine because you're probably still absorbing all of this information. But so I will start off with a question to the team around how small companies can find out more about the transparency changes that are coming, or that have come into play with EFSA, because obviously our members can talk to us or their national associations, but people across sectors deal with EFSA, and they may be in a number of different associations linked to their sector. So how can small companies get more information around the transparency regulation?
Absolutely, thanks, Claire. So as I mentioned, EFSA is, of course, a port of information. They've provided training materials, webinars, everything is available online. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll have those links in the slides as well. And then from our side, we are, of course, as a registered stakeholder, a port of information. So we are a point of dialogue between EFSA and our members. We also work with other EU associations through an informal coalition representing all the business and food industry stakeholders, registered EFSA stakeholders. And so we have raised concerns to EFSA and the Commission, the concerns that I've presented around confidentiality, around compliance with these new regulations. So yeah, we're always happy for SMEs to raise any concerns that they have so that we can present them as a group. I'd also like to note at this point that CropLife Europe have developed an open FAQ of frequently asked questions that have not yet been answered, or of technical issues that are arising as the new systems are being tried out. These FAQs are available on the CropLife Europe website and are open to anyone who is involved in any way with the transparency regulation and has a question that hasn't been answered, so you can contribute to those as well.
Thanks very much for an incredibly detailed answer. We still have no more questions on the chat, which is absolutely fine, because as I said before, it's a lot of information to absorb from the slides directly in our presentations. We will share our email addresses at the end so that you can contact us individually with specific questions. So we'll wrap up the information side of the webinar. So thank you very much indeed to the Industrial Biotech Council team for coming out into the public and sharing their immense knowledge on the subject. What we're going to do now is quickly move to say, you need to stay involved. There are topics that are of interest to you that we deal with on a daily basis. So it's extremely easy to stay in touch with us and follow what the work that we're doing, and indeed the work of our members. So obviously we will share these slides and you will have links to all of our different social media campaigns, which we would really strongly recommend that you follow, particularly LinkedIn and Twitter. We also have a weekly newsletter which covers all of the main topics coming out of the European Commission or major initiatives being launched. And of course, if you're not yet a member of EuropaBio directly and would like to get involved directly with our brilliant Industrial Biotech Council, just come and talk to us. Particularly for SMEs, it's lovely and cheap. But of course, also stay involved by coming and getting involved in our meetings that we have coming up. And we have a packed calendar this year. So coming up before summer, in early May, on the 10th of May, we have a summit for our national associations. And we're really looking at where Europe develops from now economically, using the advances and the knowledge learned from COVID. So because we've seen a huge change in how products are developed, the partnerships that are developed, the money that's got in, the regulatory framework. So Europe can really build on this to help accelerate its economic recovery from the COVID crisis. So this is an open call, open meeting, anybody can take part, and we'll be working with our national association to look at where we go next. The next one we have coming up within the SME platform itself is on June the 3rd, and that is looking at EU healthcare biotech priorities for small companies. So again, our brilliant Healthcare Council team will walk through some of the key priorities around healthcare at the moment, and there are a lot. We've been through a period of relative calm for sort of strategy and regulatory changes and policy changes, but now there's a lot coming through at the same time, and all within the context of the green transition and the digital transition that Europe foresees. After that, we move into June, and we have another SME platform meeting that's all about alternative sources of financing for small companies. So we're going to have a really good look at how going public can help grow small companies, particularly when it comes to raising large enough sums of money for large infrastructure developments and the typical, sort of valley of death for investment, where you've run out of the innovation phase of funding, but really need to put the money in to be able to scale up and get to market in a meaningful way. So we would invite you all to join those meetings as well, and you'll be able to click through the slides to sign up for those. And then we get to our major Industrial Biotech Council meeting for the year, which is EFIB, and we are absolutely delighted to say that this will be taking place face to face in Vienna in October. So it will actually be a wonderful opportunity for our community to come together for the first time in 2 years. And this, if you are active in industrial biotechnology, you need to come to this meeting. So we look at all aspects of industrial biotechnology, the sectors that it's moving into, the mechanisms that you need to move into those sectors, and how industrial biotechnology works from advanced research into small companies into large companies. It's a great opportunity to come and meet all of our members, from the smallest startup to the largest company, and we will have an incredibly busy agenda plus partnering for people. So we will launch registration for this very soon, and if you're following us on any of our social media platforms or through our newsletter, you will find about it here. So we're very excited to get back together again directly, and we're really looking forward to go to Vienna, which is delightful at the best of times, and it will be really nice for the first time in 2 years. So with that, I will say thank you. You have our email addresses here, and you will be able to contact any of us with follow-up questions from this webinar today. And as Lucy mentioned earlier, we've got as well links and resources that underpin all of the slides that we use today, so you can find out a little bit more. And again, please do not hesitate to come and ask us any questions. So one more time, I would really like to thank Agnes and Lucy for all their hard work in pulling these policies areas together, because they are complex and they are large. So we tried to push this into a sort of industrial biotech policy 101 for our wider community. So thank you all very much indeed, and I will wrap up the webinar now, and we will share the recording and the slides with you hopefully tomorrow. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.